I spent 3 hours making sure my hair looked effortless, but I couldn't fix the peeling fake leather on my 6-year-old pumps. When the heel snapped in the middle of a Michelin star restaurant, I wanted the floor to swallow me. Instead, the billionaire sitting across from me did the unthinkable. The smell of cheap, industrial superglue is distinct. It burns the back of your throat, a sharp chemical reminder of things falling apart. I sat on the edge of my bathtub, a tube of the stuff squeezed between my thumb and forefinger, applying a liberal line of clear paste to the sole of my left shoe. These were my good shoes. Plain black pumps, bought on a clearance rack at a dying department store 6 years ago, long before my son Toby was born. Long before my ex-husband decided that fatherhood was a coat he preferred to leave in the closet. The faux leather at the toe was scuffed to a dull gray. I had colored it in with a black Sharpie 20 minutes prior. Now I pressed the sole and the heel together, holding my breath, counting to 60. "Mommy!" I looked up. Toby was standing in the doorway of the tiny bathroom wearing mismatched dinosaur pajamas, rubbing his right eye with a sticky fist. He was 4, a messy, beautiful collision of energy and constant needs. "Hey, Bug," I said, keeping the pressure on the shoe. "Mrs. Hastings," I caught myself. "Mrs. Rooney is going to be here in 10 minutes. Did you brush your teeth?" "No," he said, perfectly unashamed. "Are you going to work again?" "Not tonight." I finally released the shoe. It held. Barely. "Mommy's going to dinner." "With a boy." "With a man," I corrected, though I felt a surge of cynical exhaustion at the word. "A blind date." My best friend Chloe had orchestrated this. She worked as an executive assistant at a massive logistics firm downtown, and she had spent the last 3 weeks wearing me down. "He's my boss's boss," she had said, leaning over my kitchen island while I chopped discount carrots for a stew. "Dominic. He's brilliant, Harper. And he's so normal. He just works too much. He needs someone real." I had laughed in her face. Real in my world meant bouncing a check for electricity. Real in his world meant deciding which vintage Porsche to take to the Hamptons. But Chloe was relentless. And honestly, the promise of a meal that didn't involve boxed macaroni was a heavy motivator. I slid the pumps onto my feet. They felt stiff, the dried glue creating a hard ridge against my arch. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. It was a navy wrap dress, arguably the only piece of clothing I owned that still looked socially acceptable in the zip code Chloe had sent me. Mrs. Rooney arrived, smelling of peppermint and old paperbacks. I gave her my emergency numbers, kissed Toby's forehead, and stepped out into the damp evening air. The commute was a brutal reminder of the class divide I was about to cross. It was raining, a fine, misty drizzle that coated the sidewalks in a treacherous slick. I took the subway, standing close to the doors, clutching my purse to my chest. I stared down at my feet the entire ride. The Sharpie ink was already fading from the dampness. I shifted my weight, feeling the precarious give of the left heel. When I emerged from the underground, the city shifted. The bodegas and cracked pavement gave way to soaring glass facades and doormen standing beneath wide, brass-ribbed awnings. The restaurant, L'Eclipse, sat at the corner of a quiet, tree-lined avenue. There were no neon signs, just a discreet silver plaque and heavy oak doors. I took a deep breath, the damp air filling my lungs. I pulled my shoulders back. I was Harper. I worked a day job at a dental office and picked up night shifts doing remote data entry. I loved my kid. I paid my taxes. I had a right to occupy space, even here. I pushed the heavy oak door open. The warmth of the restaurant hit me instantly, carrying the scent of truffles, dry red wine, and burning cedar. The lighting was impossibly dim, designed to make everyone look young and wealthy. The hostess, a woman in a sleek black dress who looked like she subsisted entirely on alkaline water and contempt, looked me up and down. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Harper," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm meeting Dominic." Her posture changed instantly. The contempt vanished, replaced by a terrifying, polished obedience. "Of course. Mr. Hayes is already seated. Right this way." I followed her across the dining room. I walked carefully, deliberately, placing my weight on the balls of my feet to protect the glued heel. I kept my eyes fixed on the back of the hostess's head, terrified to look at the other diners. I felt like an imposter. I felt like the Sharpie on my shoes was glowing neon in the low light. Then I saw him. He was sitting in a curved leather booth near the back, nursing a glass of sparkling water. Chloe had said he was 34, a billionaire who built a tech logistics empire out of a dorm room. I had expected a slick, gelled hair finance bro in a three-piece suit checking a Rolex every 4 seconds. Dominic Hayes was not that. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, yes, but the jacket was draped over the back of the booth. His white dress shirt had the sleeves rolled up to the forearms, revealing strong, lightly scarred skin. His tie was loosened, but it was his face that caught me off guard. He had dark, heavy hair that looked like he ran his hands through it 100 times a day, and a strong, square jaw. His eyes were the color of wet slate, carrying the kind of deep, structural exhaustion that usually comes from manual labor, not boardrooms. He looked up as I approached, and the weariness in his eyes momentarily lifted. He stood up immediately, not a polite half-rise, but fully standing, buttoning an invisible jacket out of sheer habit. "Harper," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone. It wasn't smooth or practiced. It was just a voice. "Dominic," I replied, offering my hand. His grip was firm, his skin warm. "Thank you for coming. Chloe told me you have a young son. I know getting away for an evening is a logistical nightmare." I slid into the booth, immediately tucking my feet as far back under the table as humanly possible. The thick linen tablecloth draped down, providing a perfect shield. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Logistical nightmares, putting it mildly," I said, reaching for my napkin and placing it on my lap. "But Mrs. Rooney was bribed with a double shift's worth of pay, so here I am." I winced internally. Don't mention money. It was a habit. When you don't have money, it's all you think about. It colors every conversation, every joke, every complaint. Dominic didn't flinch. He just smiled, a small, genuine curve of his mouth. "I respect a good bribe. Can I get you a drink? The wine list here is a little..." He glanced at the leather-bound book on the table, thick as a dictionary. "Pretentious. Just a glass of whatever house red they have," I said. A waiter materialized out of thin air. Dominic ordered my wine and a scotch for himself. The waiter vanished. "So," Dominic leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He didn't check his phone. He didn't scan the room to see who was looking at him. He looked directly at me. "Chloe tells me you run a dental office by day and manage databases by night." "Chloe exaggerates," I said, taking a sip of the ice water. "I schedule root canals and fight with insurance companies by day. At night, I input numbers into spreadsheets until my eyes cross. Hard work. Necessary work." I met his gaze. I expected to see pity, or perhaps a polite, detached interest. Instead, I saw a quiet recognition. "I remember those days," he said quietly. "When I started my first company, I lived in a garage that flooded every time it rained. I ate ramen out of a coffee mug for 2 years. I arched an eyebrow. Is this the part where the billionaire tells the working-class girl that he's just like her? The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. My cynical defense mechanism firing on all cylinders. I braced myself for his reaction. Most men with his kind of money would immediately get defensive, puff out their chests, and list their struggles as a badge of honor. Dominic just laughed. It was a rich, sudden sound that startled the table next to us. Fair point, he said, holding up his hands in surrender. No, I am not just like you. I haven't worried about a bill in 8 years. I fly private. I'm detached from the reality of the subway and grocery prices. I wasn't trying to patronize you, Harper. I was just trying to say I respect the hustle. I felt my shoulders drop an inch. The tension in my neck eased. Okay, apology accepted. And for the record, I respect the private jet. The waiter returned with our drinks. For the next hour, something incredibly strange happened. I actually enjoyed myself. Dominic didn't talk about his wealth, his companies, or his portfolio. He asked about Toby. He asked what it was like trying to raise a kid in the city. He listened to my stories about the eccentric patients at the dental office. When he did talk about himself, it was about his mistakes. He told a self-deprecating story about ruining a multi-million-dollar pitch because he had spilled coffee on his only suit pants and had to present from behind a podium, completely barefoot. He was self-aware. He was sharp. And he was incredibly attentive. We ordered dinner. I picked the cheapest thing on the menu, a chicken dish that still cost more than my weekly grocery budget. He ordered a steak. As we ate, the conversation flowed, shifting from light banter to heavier, realer topics. He talked about the isolation of his position, the weight of having thousands of employees relying on his decisions. People look at the money and think the anxiety goes away, he said, turning his scotch glass in his hand. It doesn't. It just changes shape. You stop worrying about surviving, and you start worrying about failing everyone who trusts you. I think I'd prefer your shape of anxiety, I admitted honestly. He smiled softly. I know you would. And I don't blame you. It was intoxicating. Not just the wine, though that was helping. It was the feeling of being seen, of sitting across from a man who wasn't trying to sleep with me, impress me, or talk over me. He was just engaging with me. For a solid 90 minutes, I forgot about the cramped apartment. I forgot about the electric bill. And disastrously, I forgot about the shoes. It happened during dessert. We hadn't ordered any, but the waiter brought over a complimentary plate of tiny, intricate pastries because apparently, when you are Dominic Hayes, sugar just arrives at your table unprompted. I shifted in my seat, turning my body slightly to reach for my purse, which was resting on the seat beside me, to grab a tissue. My left leg, which had been tucked safely under my chair for 2 hours, extended outward. At that exact moment, a busboy moving a heavy brass cart of dirty dishes rounded the corner of our booth. He was rushing. The wheel of the cart caught the edge of the thick rug beneath our table, jerking the cart violently to the left. The heavy metal frame of the cart slammed into the side of the table. The table jolted. My water glass tipped, sending a wave of ice water cascading over the edge, directly toward my lap. I reacted purely on instinct. I threw myself backward, pushing my chair away from the table with my legs to avoid the freezing spill. My left foot planted hard against the hardwood floor, bearing the brunt of my sudden, violent movement. Crack. It wasn't a small sound. In the muted, jazz-filled ambiance of the restaurant, the sound of brittle, dried superglue giving way and cheap plastic snapping against polished oak echoed like a gunshot. The left heel of my shoe completely sheared off. My foot collapsed backward, sending me awkwardly plunging downward. I caught myself on the edge of the table, rattling the silverware, my face flushing violently. But that wasn't the worst part. The broken heel, a 2-inch piece of scuffed black plastic, skittered across the floor. It slid past the brass cart and bumped directly into the polished, immaculately shined leather Oxford of the maitre d', who had rushed over at the sound of the collision. Silence descended on our corner of the restaurant. The busboy was pale, stammering apologies. The maitre d' looked down at the broken piece of plastic resting against his expensive shoe. He reached down, picked it up between 2 fingers as if it were a dead rodent, and looked at me. I looked down at my feet. Because I had pushed my chair back, my legs were fully exposed. My left foot rested at an unnatural angle, the shoe completely flat at the back. The torn gray fabric where the heel used to be visible to God and everyone. The black Sharpie had smeared from the dampness of the street, leaving a dirty stain across my skin. A woman at the next table over, dripping in pearls, leaned over to whisper to her companion, not bothering to hide her disdainful gaze. My face burned. The heat started in my chest and radiated upward, crawling up my neck and consuming my cheeks. The illusion was shattered. The clock had struck midnight and my rags were showing. The deep, gnawing shame of poverty. The shame I fought off every single day. The shame I told myself didn't matter because I worked hard. Crashed over me like a tidal wave. I couldn't look at Dominic. I couldn't look at his tailored suit or his slate gray eyes. I knew what I would see. Embarrassment, awkward pity. The realization that Chloe had set him up with a charity case. "I'm so sorry, madam," the maitre d' said smoothly, his tone dripping with condescension. He stepped forward, holding out the broken plastic heel like a piece of garbage he wanted me to dispose of. "It seems you have lost this." I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, to take it. Before my fingers could touch the plastic, a large, warm hand intercepted it. Dominic stood up. He plucked the broken heel from the maitre d's fingers. He didn't look angry, but his presence suddenly felt massive, completely filling the space. "Thank you, Henri," Dominic said, his voice flat and cold as ice. "That will be all." Henri blinked, taken aback. "Mr. Hayes, the water's fine. Put the meal on my account. We are leaving." "Sir, dessert." "We're leaving, Henri," Dominic repeated, and this time the billionaire CEO was fully present in his voice. It was a voice that ended negotiations and fired executives. It brooked absolutely no argument. Henri bowed his head and quickly retreated, dragging the busboy with him. The surrounding tables awkwardly returned to their meals, though the whispers continued. I sat frozen, staring at my lap. My vision blurred with hot, angry tears that I refused to let fall. "Dominic," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Harper," he said. His voice dropped the ice instantly, returning to the warm, low tone from dinner. "Look at me." I shook my head. "I need to go. I need to call a cab." I reached down, awkwardly pulling my shoe off and slipping the broken piece of plastic into my purse. I couldn't walk in it. I would have to walk out with one bare foot. The humiliation was absolute. Harper. He stepped around the table. He ignored the spilled water. He ignored the stairs. He crouched down right beside my chair, bringing himself to my eye level. I finally looked at him. One tear escaped, tracking hot down my cheek. I hated myself for it. He didn't look embarrassed. He didn't look pitying. He looked fiercely, intensely focused on me. "Do not apologize," he said quietly, his eyes locked onto mine. You didn't bump the table. You didn't do anything wrong. Understand? I don't belong here, I choked out. Look at me, Dominic. My shoes are glued together. I colored them with a marker so they wouldn't look so old. I don't belong in places like this. He reached out and gently wiped the tear from my cheek with his thumb. The gesture was so tender, so completely at odds with the sterile wealth of the room, that it nearly broke me. Places like this don't matter, he said. He stood up, picked up my coat from the back of the chair and held it open. Put your coat on. I can't walk, I muttered, looking at my one bare foot. I know. Before I could process what he was doing, Dominic tossed my coat over my shoulders, leaned down, and scooped me up into his arms. I gasped, my hands flying to his shoulders. Dominic, put me down. You can't just carry me out of here. Watch me, he said grimly. And he did. With my broken shoe in my purse and one foot dangling bare, Dominic Hayes, CEO, billionaire, carried me through the center of the Michelin-starred dining room. He didn't rush. He walked with measured, deliberate steps. When the patrons stared, he stared back, his expression so hard and uncompromising that they quickly averted their eyes. He pushed through the heavy oak doors, and we were out in the cool, damp night. The rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and gleaming under the streetlights. He set me down gently on a dry patch of concrete beneath an awning, keeping one hand on my waist to steady me. Are you okay? He asked, checking my face. I am mortified, I said truthfully, pulling my coat tighter around myself. I looked down at the cold, wet pavement. I need to get to the subway. Dominic looked at my bare foot. He looked at the cheap, scuffed shoe still on my right foot. He didn't say a word about the Sharpie or the peeling leather. He looked down the street, his jaw working. You're not taking the subway, he said. Dominic, seriously, you've been kind, but I can't afford a $50 cab ride back to my neighborhood, and I won't let you pay for it. My cynical pride was flaring up again, a shield to protect the raw, exposed nerve of my embarrassment. He turned back to me. I'm not putting you in a cab, and I'm not putting you on the subway barefoot. Come with me. He offered me his arm. Where are we going? I asked, hesitating. Just down the block, he said softly. Lean on me. I've got you. I didn't have much of a choice. I gripped his forearm. It felt like grabbing a steel cable wrapped in expensive wool. We walked slowly, my bare foot avoiding the puddles, me leaning heavily against his side. We walked past a closed bank, past a dark coffee shop, until we stopped in front of a glowing storefront. I looked up. The sign above the door read Maison de Viril. It was a high-end luxury shoe boutique, the kind of place that didn't have prices in the window, the kind of place that locked its doors and required an appointment just to browse. Inside, through the glass, I could see pristine white shelves displaying shoes that looked like pieces of modern art. A security guard stood just inside the door, and a solitary saleswoman was rearranging a display, even though it was past 9 o'clock. Dominic, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. No, absolutely not. I am not letting you buy me shoes. You can't walk home, Harper. I will buy flip-flops at a bodega. I am not a charity case. I pulled my hand away from his arm, taking a step back and almost losing my balance on my bare foot. He caught me, his hands firm on my shoulders. He didn't pull me closer, just steadied me. Harper, listen to me, he said, his voice dropping, losing any trace of command and replacing it with something deeply earnest. I know you're not a charity case. I know you worked twice as hard as anyone in that restaurant tonight, just to keep a roof over your son's head. I know your pride is the armor that gets you through the day. He looked at my broken, glued shoe and then back up to my eyes. I am not doing this because I pity you. Dominic said quietly, the sincerity in his slate-gray eyes anchoring me to the spot. I am doing this because I am on a date with a beautiful, brilliant woman, and the night isn't over yet. Let me do this. Please. I stared at him. The fight drained out of me, leaving me exhausted and for the first time in a very long time, entirely disarmed. He turned, walked to the glass door of the boutique, and knocked on the heavy glass. The security guard, a broad-shouldered man in a tight suit, frowned through the glass. He tapped his wristwatch, then pointed a thick finger at the discreet brass closed sign hanging in the window. Dominic didn't step back. He pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped a few buttons, and held the screen against the glass. I couldn't see what he was showing the guard, but the reaction was instantaneous. The man's posture snapped from relaxed annoyance to rigid attention. He fumbled with the deadbolt, the heavy lock sliding back with a loud metallic clack. The door swung open, releasing a wave of warm air carrying the scent of expensive leather and polished wood. "Mr. Hayes," the guard said, stepping aside. "My apologies, sir. I didn't recognize you." "It's fine, Robert," Dominic said, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, guiding me inside. The boutique was painfully silent. It didn't look like a store. It looked like an art gallery. There were no crowded racks, just individual shoes resting on illuminated pedestals. The floor was covered in a cream-colored rug so thick my one bare foot sank into it like snow. A woman emerged from the back room. She wore a severe, asymmetrical black dress and wire-rimmed glasses. She looked like she could calculate your net worth just by examining your cuticles. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice a practiced purr. "Beatrice, the regional manager. Robert just radioed, is quite late, but we are always happy to accommodate our VIP clients. How can I help you?" "My date needs shoes," Dominic said simply. Beatrice shifted her gaze to me. It was a subtle, sweeping look, but I felt every inch of it. She took in my damp coat. She took in my cheap dress. And then her eyes landed on my feet. One bare, the other sporting a 6-year-old clearance pump with Sharpie bleeding into the faux suede. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes went dead. It was the exact same look the maitre d' had given me. It was the look that said you are trespassing. "I see," Beatrice said smoothly. "Unfortunately, sir, we are currently transitioning our seasonal floor set. Our registers are closed for the evening, and frankly, our inventory is highly curated. We require appointments for private fittings to ensure we have the appropriate selections." It was a polite, heavily sanitized way of saying, "Get her out of here." I shrank back. The shame from the restaurant, which had temporarily subsided in the cold street air, came rushing back. I pulled my coat tighter. "Dominic," I whispered, tugging his sleeve, "let's just go. Really, I'm fine." Dominic didn't move. He stared at Beatrice. The easy-going guy who had laughed about spilling coffee on his pants was entirely gone. In his place stood the man who built an empire. "Beatrice," Dominic said softly, dangerously softly, "what is the approximate retail value of your entire stock right now? Floor displays and backroom combined." Beatrice blinked. Her practiced composure slipped for a fraction of a second. Excuse me?" "The inventory," Dominic repeated, pulling a heavy matte black card from his wallet and placing it face down on the nearest glass display case. "I'm buying it, all of it." The silence in the room became absolute. The security guard coughed nervously into his fist. "Sir," Beatrice stammered, the purr completely gone from her voice. "You can't be serious. We have over 400 pairs of shoes in stock. The total would be—" "Run the card, Beatrice," Dominic interrupted, his tone leaving zero room for negotiation. Ring it up as a corporate bulk purchase. Tomorrow morning, my assistant will send a freight truck to collect the inventory. We'll be donating it to the Eastside Women's Shelter for their job interview program. Beatrice stared at the black card. She swallowed hard. Yes, Mr. Hayes. Right away. Good. Dominic turned his attention back to me. Now, what size are you? I was paralyzed. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. 7, I managed to squeak out. Bring out every size 7 you have, Dominic told Beatrice. And bring us 2 waters. We'll be sitting over there. He guided me to a plush velvet sofa in the center of the room. I sat down heavily, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Beatrice was already frantically running to the back room, her heels clicking rapidly against the hardwood borders of the rug. Dominic, I said, my voice shaking, you did not just buy a shoe store. He sat down next to me, leaving a respectful amount of space between us. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I bought the inventory, not the store, and it's a tax write-off. Don't worry about it. A tax write-off? I laughed. It was a harsh, incredulous sound. You spent hundreds of thousands of dollars because a sales clerk gave me a dirty look? No, he said, turning to look at me. The intensity in his eyes was back. I bought them because you spent the last 2 hours apologizing for existing. You spent dinner hiding your feet under a tablecloth. You let a broken piece of plastic convince you that you don't deserve to sit at a table with me. I stared at my lap. My throat felt tight. I wanted to remove the price tag from the equation, he continued gently. I didn't want you looking at the bottom of a shoe and putting it back because you felt you weren't worth the number printed on the sticker. Tonight, Harper, the entire store belongs to you. You can walk out of here barefoot if you want to. But if you walk out of here in shoes, it's going to be because you actually like them. The cynicism I had worn like a heavy winter coat my entire adult life suddenly felt suffocating. I wanted to take it off. I looked at the man sitting next to me. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't trying to buy my affection. He had seen the exact moment my dignity cracked, and he had used his resources to build a wall around me so no one else could make me feel small. A laugh bubbled up in my chest. It wasn't harsh this time. It was a genuine, disbelieving laugh. I covered my mouth with my hand, shaking my head. You are insane, I whispered. Probably, he agreed, the corner of his mouth ticking upward. I dropped my hand. I looked at him, and for the first time all night, I stopped trying to hide. I smiled, a wide, real smile that reached my eyes. Okay, Hayes, let's see what a tax write-off looks like on my feet. Dominic let out a breath, and his shoulders finally dropped. He smiled back. That's all I wanted to see. Beatrice returned with a rolling cart stacked high with boxes. She was sweating slightly. I didn't look at the sky-high stilettos covered in rhinestones. I didn't look at the strappy sandals that offered no support. I dug through the boxes until I found a pair of soft butter leather loafers. They were black, simple, and beautifully crafted. I slipped them on. They felt like a second skin. There was no pinching, no rigid dried glue, just support. These, I said, standing up and testing my weight. Dominic didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't push me towards something flashier. He just nodded. Keep them on. We walked out of the store 10 minutes later. I left the broken clearance pump in a trash can by the register. Beatrice held the door for us, thanking Dominic profusely, her eyes respectfully averted. The street was quiet. The rain had washed the air clean. Dominic had a car waiting, a discreet black sedan idling at the corner. He opened the back door for me. I slid in and he followed, sitting on the opposite side of the leather bench. The drive to my neighborhood was peaceful. We didn't talk about the store. We didn't talk about the restaurant. We talked about Toby again. I told him about my son's current obsession with a specific species of prehistoric aquatic lizard. And Dominic listened with absolute focus, asking questions that proved he wasn't just humoring me. When the car pulled up to my apartment building, the contrast was jarring. The brick was stained, the front steps were chipped, and the street lamp above us buzzed and flickered ominously. I braced myself for the shift in his demeanor. I waited for the awkwardness, the subtle pulling away now that he saw exactly where I lived. It didn't happen. Dominic stepped out of the car, walked around to my side, and opened my door. He offered his hand. I took it, stepping out onto the cracked pavement. My new leather loafers made no sound. He walked me to the front door of the building. We stopped under the flickering light. "Thank you," I said, looking up at him. "For dinner. For the bailout. For the shoes. You don't need to thank me, Harper." He put his hands in his pockets. He looked completely at ease standing on my crumbling stoop. "I had a really good time tonight. Even with the disaster?" "The disaster was the best part," he said smoothly. "It weeded out the snobs." I laughed softly. "Well, Chloe's going to have a field day with this tomorrow." "Let her," Dominic said. He stepped a half-inch closer. The air between us suddenly felt charged, heavy with the quiet intimacy of the late hour. "I'd like to see you again, if you're willing." I looked at him, at the exhaustion lines around his eyes, at the genuine warmth in his gaze. I thought about my budget spreadsheets, the subway commutes, the cheap super glue. And then I thought about the man who had carried me out of a room full of people who wanted me to feel small. "I'd like that," I said honestly. "But next time, I'm picking the restaurant, and we're getting pizza." Dominic smiled, a slow, devastating expression in the dim light. "Deal." He didn't try to kiss me. He didn't push for anything more. He just reached out, lightly squeezed my arm, and stepped back. "Good night, Harper." "Good night, Dominic." I unlocked the heavy glass door, stepped inside, and waited until he got back into his car. As the black sedan pulled away, merging into the sparse city traffic, I looked down at my feet. The shoes were perfect. They were beautiful, yes. But more importantly, they were solid. I turned and walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. I paid the babysitter, checked on Toby, who was sleeping diagonally across his bed, surrounded by plastic dinosaurs, and went into my tiny bathroom. I washed my face. I looked in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked like a single mom working 2 jobs. But for the first time in a very long time, I didn't look defeated. I took off the leather loafers and placed them neatly by the door. They were a gift, a ridiculous, wonderful, impossible gift. But they weren't the thing holding me up. I was standing on my own 2 feet, and tomorrow I was going to walk out the door and keep going. If you loved Harper and Dominic's story, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to show your support and share this video with a friend who loves a deeply human romance where the underdog wins. Want more grounded, emotional stories that hit right in the feels? Make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Drop a comment below. Would you have let him buy the store?